Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to our Methane Moment Pavilion at the COP26. A warm welcome to all of you here in the audience, as well as to those tuning in virtually, either from home or from work. My name is Felicia Ruiz, and I am with the Clean Air Task Force. I have the honor today of introducing you all and speaking with Scott Foster from the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. Scott joined UNECE in 2011 as the Director for Sustainable Energy. He previously founded and managed his own energy consulting firm, Nomad Energy. He's also been the Global Regulatory Affairs Vice President at AES, Senior Director for Global Power with Cambridge Energy Research Associates, a senior expert on electricity at the International Energy Agency, and a hydroelectric engineer, of all things, at PGE, at Pacific Gas and Electric Company. Scott has over 30 years of experience in the energy industry, and I have had the pleasure of knowing and working with Scott for over a decade now. We've worked together mainly with respect to reducing methane emissions from coal mining activities, and we'll talk a little bit about that specifically in just a moment. But first, Scott, tell me a little bit more about the work that the Sustainable Energy Division is doing with respect to methane. Among other things, the Sustainable Energy Division has a mandate to provide access to clean and affordable energy for all, and part of that has to do with reducing the environmental footprint of the energy systems. And so how does methane fit into all of this, and how did the mandate start for UNECE to start focusing on this?
Well, thank you very much. Good afternoon, Felicia. It's nice to be with you today. Nice to see you again after a while. In terms of methane, it's actually one of the critical parts of our whole program. We've been working on methane for quite some time. I think everybody in the pavilion here would know that methane is a very important greenhouse gas. On an instantaneous basis, it's actually 120 times more potent as a global warming greenhouse gas than CO2. So clearly it's something that we've got to address. Also, atmospheric concentrations are higher today than they've been for 650,000 years. So instead of addressing the problem, it's just getting worse and worse, and it clearly needs to be addressed. So we're looking at the issue of methane, if you will, as a four-legged stool, where we're looking at upstream gas, upstream oil and gas, I should say, downstream gas, downstream oil, and the coal sector. The first floor of this four-legged stool is what I call MRV, what people call MRV, which is the monitoring and reporting verification, trying to understand what's the right approach we should take. The second one then is remediation, and how do you fix it? We actually started on methane before I was at a UNECE. A group of experts was formed in 2005 with the support of GMI, with the support of EPA, so you're kind of an instigator on that front. And they worked for many years developing best practice guidance on coal mine methane. In essence, it's driven by the three pillars of the UN. You've got the social pillar, you've got the environmental pillar, and you've got the economic pillar. In terms of environment, I've already mentioned about methane, so I won't go into that in any more detail. On the social angle, every time there's an explosion in a coal mine, and it goes boom, and you lose all of those coal miners, you've pretty much trashed the social infrastructure of the local community that's involved. That's tragic, and it needs to be addressed, and simply managing accumulations of methane in coal mines goes a long way. On the economic front, you also have the idea that you're recovering methane, you're using it, taking it from the methane angle and turning it into CO2, but you're getting useful economic outcomes. So with all of those drivers, there was a real rationale for let's get into the methane area. The final comment I can make is UNECE is known as a standards organization, developing normative instruments. So we bring all of the experts together, the private industry, from academia, from public sector, and they debate and argue and have a big fisticuffs argument, ending up with something that everybody can buy into. And once you've got this consensus and this agreement across the board, it's possible to disseminate it. That's what we did, and the first best practice guidance on coal mine methane was published in 2010.
In terms of best practices, as you mentioned, your standards organization, you've done a lot of work in best practices. You just talked about the best practices guidance for effective methane drainage and use in coal mines. Recently, there was another best practices document that has come out associated with abandoned mines. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. As we go through the process of developing the best practice guidance, you're actually never done. There can be extension of the best practice guidance on coal mine methane to other areas that weren't addressed in the first document. So a new version of the best practice guidance on coal mine methane came out in the end of 2016, December. It's actually been translated into a whole load of languages. We've got it in Russian, we've got it in Mongolian, we've got it in Bosnian, Serbian, Croatian, we've got it in Spanish as well. So it's gotten a lot of legs, shall we say, because it's got a lot of application. Informally, it's also been translated into Polish. Well, suddenly you move along and you realize as the world is moving away from coal mining and they're shutting down coal mines, just because you've stopped commercial operations doesn't mean that all of the migration of these molecules into your shafts and then venting has gone away. So there's clearly a need for mines that have been closed, called abandoned mines, to be monitored and reviewed, to track and report, and then to deal with that methane. If you've got a local community, it's still possible to use that methane commercially. So there's going to be a whole wodge, I'll say, of activities on abandoned mine methane. That's not a finished process. We do have the best practice guidance, but there'll be more, just as there were with the coal mine methane. And next generation is going to be then surface mine methanes. Okay. How do you deal with the issue of surface mine methanes? And then come before it, and you've got the pre-mine drainage. So if you look around all of the coal seams around the world, the amount of methane that's being emitted, whether it's being mined or not, is enormous. And all of these techniques and methods that are being developed would be very useful.
Appreciate that comment. One of the strengths, I think, of UNECE and its work in the different groups of experts that you have, not only in CMM, but also on the group of experts on gas, is the involvement of the private sector. There's been a lot of talk here at the COP in terms of the role the private sector plays in mitigating methane emissions in a variety of sectors, oil and gas, agriculture. Talking a little bit about coal mines and the private sector initiatives that have taken place in conjunction with the groups of experts at UNECE, can you talk a little bit about how the private sector gets involved in these groups of experts and how UNECE plays to the strengths of the inclusion of private industry?
Yeah, absolutely. The private sector is really essential to the success of our work. We're set up with an intergovernmental body called the Committee on Sustainable Energy. Underneath that, we've got 6 different expert groups working on different topics. You've mentioned some of them, gas and coal and cleaner electricity. I shouldn't forget to mention energy efficiency and renewables, but they're all part of the team. We then, underneath those groups of experts, have different task forces that work on different topics. If we want to have a legitimate and credible outcome at the end of the day, involving the private sector, it really is involving the industry who are dealing with the commercial realities on a day-to-day basis. So we want to have a very solid knowledge foundation for the work that we're coming out with, and then we want it to be applied by the operators, the people who are using it. So by having a regular dialogue along the way, we're able to engage the private sector massively. The chairs of all of our groups of experts are actually from the private sector, maybe there's one exception, and they come from the industry, and they bring in the other players. Once it comes out of our groups of experts, it then goes through an intergovernmental process, so it hasn't been bought by the private sector, but it has got the credibility, the force of commercial realities, and it's delivering the outcomes that we need.
And I think that's an important point, right? Making sure that you have the credibility aspect there, I think is incredibly important.
It is. I would say that when we come out with a document like our best practice guidance, and then it goes out for peer review, when it comes back, there are comments, but they tend to be fine-tuning because the experts actually have done a good job in the preparation phase. So there's always more work to be done, and we really like and need and depend on private sector engagement.
And having sat through a couple of those reviews with members of the private sector, I can definitely attest to the fact that some of the best experts in the field had been working and editing these documents to make sure that they were practical and actually implementable in the field.
If I can elaborate on that a bit, we have our chairs. They're from private sector. They burn the midnight oil. They're not paid for it. It's off of their company time. They're doing it on their own free time. They're really believing in what they're doing. So the subject itself matters. And they're doing it at the United Nations because we're really the only place that can go global in terms of scale, global in terms of impact. So they see this channel, this avenue, as a way of actually getting out what they know about the topic and having a real impact, moving the dial on energy for sustainable development. And that's what drives them. That's what motivates them.
You know, it brings to mind another aspect of your work in methane, the International Centers of Excellence on coal mine methane. One was set up in China, one was set up in Poland. My understanding is those are still active and moving forward, correct?
They are active, they are moving forward. We're hopeful to be able to expand them as all of these different best practice guidance get promulgated. We're doing work as well in the oil and gas area, so this network of centers of excellence won't be limited to coal mine methane, but specifically on coal mine methane. The other countries that are doing this work should be having these kinds of centers in their place. It involves engagement with the local industry, with the local communities, and also with the political infrastructure. So there's a dialogue and a conversation that gives them a connection into the United Nations, which then gives them further motivation to deploy and implement. We are using the Centers of Excellence as well for case studies. Nothing actually speaks louder than saying, here's the problem that we have, here are the issues that we're facing, and here's how we'd like to address it. You come then develop this case study, and you can come up with a publication, and people can say, that's exactly the same problem I have. So over time, with these Centers of Excellence, we're getting better deployment, better dissemination, and a better library of case studies that people can use.
No, I think one of the things that's been impressive too in terms of those case studies is that you have case studies from some of the biggest emitters, right? You've got case studies obviously from the US, you have them from China, from India, from Australia. And I think we've had to turn down, right, previous requests for case studies because the document was getting so massive and those real world examples, which is encouraging, and hopefully those next iterations of the best practices guides have more case studies added to them, and then the International Centers of Excellence can continue to move that discussion forward.
That's a model we're using in a number of areas. We've got Centers of Excellence on sustainable resource management. We've got Centers of Excellence on high performance buildings. We've got Centers of Excellence on coal mine methane. In each case, the idea of developing relevant case studies that people can look at, and we don't want thundering big documents. Having small pointed ones is actually much more effective. Having them not even in paper format, but out on the website makes it downloadable and something that they can access. Then an aspiring mine setup who wants to have experts come in, they can actually call on our group of experts to say, can you come in and help us with the challenges that we're facing? So it really is a dynamic that's important.
No, thank you for that. We've been talking a lot, I think, over the past week or so in terms of how countries are going to move forward to implement the promises that they're making under the Global Methane Pledge. And I think in my personal opinion, the International Centers of Excellence can be a great hub in those countries that are participating and that want to look at reducing coal mine methane emissions, because I think one of the aspects of the centers is that you're going to have those experts, as you said, there to potentially train staff, train coal mining companies, spread the disseminate those case studies that you just mentioned. And I think it's an excellent way to continue that methane movement and start with boots on the ground and actually getting the engineers trained and, like you said, getting the governments involved and disseminating the information further.
What I find the United Nations is very good at having a big ribbon cutting event with some large ship being going off and you throw the champagne bottle against the side of it, but you actually haven't changed anything. And with these international centers of excellence, you're getting really at the grassroots level, as you put it, boots on the ground. You're engaging with the local community, the local industry, in a way that's practical. You're actually dealing with their day-to-day problems. So this is a nice way to bridge what the UN is trying to achieve in terms of the vision, the policies, and the perspectives, and what happens when I show up on Main Street. And that connection is really important.
So what comes next? You've no stranger to methane. One of the early advocates, definitely, on coal mine methane. What comes next for the UNECE with regards to methane mitigation and management?
Well, I've mentioned one of them already, which is the surface mine methane. There will be extensions of the coal mine methane and the abandoned mine methane. That's continuing work. We are in discussions with partners about developing standards for coal mine closure. When you think
So
about
important.
when you think about a coal mine that's been developed, around it you've got an urban and industrial ecosystem that is merged. I can't suddenly pretend I'm Thanos and make it all disappear. It doesn't go away. So if we want to pursue some kind of a policy of shutting down coal and stopping coal, what are we going to do about that urban and industrial infrastructure? So developing the standards for how you close down a coal mine means how do you monitor and control methane emissions? How do you do it in a safe way so there's subsidence and all of the environmental recovery, but also the socioeconomic dimension is really important. So that will be, I think, a first big effort that we'll undertake next is how do you go about shutting down coal mines? A second area is this idea of just transition. If they are going to shut down, how are we going to replace the economic activities? That means eventually using existing infrastructure. If we were recovering the methane, maybe we can decarbonize the methane. Maybe we can put hydrogen in. Maybe we can bring renewables in. So suddenly you're transforming the energy infrastructure that surrounded that coal mine methane, that's separate from the closure protocols. It's actually more about a just transition, and that's really essential.
It's very important.
It is.
Yes.
We are hopeful with the Global Methane Pledge, which is extremely valuable, and it's exciting to see. We've actually come forward with a proposition for an international decade for methane management, getting the UN General Assembly to come out with a declaration which really is a commitment. This means that you will be tracking and monitoring. Are we actually making progress? Looking through the steps that are going to be taken. We want to raise awareness. This kind of a declaration, and you can look back in time and see all of the previous declarations of decades, disaster risk reduction, they're very effective tools for raising awareness and making people conscious of what's going on. So we would be covering not only the energy sector, so within energy, oil, gas, and coal, but also the other sectors that are big methane emitters like agriculture, municipal solid waste, and the rest. Then, once you've got that decade in place, it should be possible to get stronger commitments from countries. 50% of methane emissions, in the oil and gas sector at least, and I think it's also true in coal, make economic sense to recover and use. So if we can raise that awareness, we can actually get the commitments because there's an economic foundation for it, suddenly you have real movement on the methane. Then we want to go through and actually be able to measure and report on the progress that we're making. And then the final one would be, let's put in enduring institutions, these centers of excellence. Let's get it, not just a bang, we've done it and we're done. What we have is something that will be sustained over time. As much as people in these walls want to say, stop using coal, there are lots of countries who are still worried about putting a roof over their head, food on their table, and they're going to use coal. No matter what I might think, but you might think what anybody else might think. And if that's true, then dealing with coal mine methane, dealing with the coal transition issues is critically important. We want them on side to deal with the climate. We don't want them to be in opposition. So having a comprehensive program in place is what we're about.
Agree. I think it's fundamental, and those are issues that I know that your group of experts is looking at, and I think that's incredible and extremely essential.
Essential, ambitious. We
Yes,
want everybody
it's very
on side.
ambitious as well. Yes, but
Exactly.
I think you guys can do it. If For those tuning in virtually, for those here in the crowd who maybe haven't worked with the Sustainable Energy Division of UNECE previously, how can we get involved? How can people participate? How can people learn more? How can people continue to be part of this movement when they interact with your organization?
I would say that the success that we've had with all of the work we've done has always depended on having real champions, people who passionately believe and are engaged. And if you don't have the champions, it just kind of fritters away and it disappears. So when you've got somebody like a Ray Pilcher, when you've got somebody like yourself and the other experts coming to the table, driving it forward, you get an outcome. So if we've got people who are online or in the audience who want to participate, come join our activities. We've got our groups of experts on gas, on coal mine methane, on cleaner electricity, and they're all involved in one way or another. Bring an agenda to the table, one that you want to drive forward, and that's a fantastic way to push the envelope, move the dial, as I like to say. Now, in addition, we have our fora and our meetings. We've got the International Forum on Energy for Sustainable Development. We have coal mine methane fora frequently. Just keep track of our website, and you can see the announcements about them. Please join us and come on board. The final one is we're having regular Methane Mondays meetings, and those are webinars online that participants can join. I did notice that the last two Methane Mondays weren't on Monday, and that disturbs me. But that's the label we've got, Methane Mondays, because of December, and that would be another way to join.
Fantastic. Okay. Well, thank you very much. Any parting words? Any final thoughts on methane?
Well, I think we came out this summer with two documents that I think are critically important. The first one we call our commitment trifecta, and these are three actions that we say, we assert, we affirm. If we do these three things, we will go a long way to addressing Paris Agreement, we will address climate change, and we will meet the objectives of the 2030 Agenda. In that commitment trifecta are getting the built environment right, dealing with methane and methane management, it's number 2 on that list, and the third one is putting in place sustainable resource management. The other document, which is longer term, is the push to pivot, and it deals with let's get to carbon neutrality, and this is all part of that same conversation. Let's undertake a just transition, you've heard those same comments, and finally let's move to a hydrogen ecosystem, and we want to do all of those. So please join us, it's an important set of topics, and appreciate your attention.
Thank you very much for being here today. Always a pleasure, I really do appreciate it, and best of luck moving forward with all of those items.
Thank you,
We look
Felicia.
forward to being a part of it.
All right, cheers.
Thank you, Scott.
Bye.